Latin Kings, Gangster Disciples, and Black P. Stones. These gangs are famous today, but their stories go way back. Let's explore their origins and evolution. Our story starts in Germany in 1933, when Adolf Hitler rose to power. Wait, what does this have to do with Chicago gangs and the Latin Kings? Hold on, I'll get to that. In a neighborhood near the Maxwell Street Market, which was predominantly Jewish, there was a cultural mix with many African Americans migrating there. The Jews weren't too happy about it, leading to frequent clashes. To defend themselves from the Jewish gangs, African Americans formed two groups, the Trevors and the Capones. In 1948, some members of the Trevors and Capones moved north and started clashing with local gangs, adapting some of their styles and tactics. Meanwhile, the Trevors and Capones fought each other for years. By 1954, the Capones lost their territory in New York, with the local gang declaring independence and forming the Cobras and Apaches, who later became powerful. During the 1950s, the area was chaotic with constant gang wars. The police had the bright idea to imprison young gang members and torture them to instill fear. However, this backfired, making the gangs more determined. The Capones, enraged by police brutality, formed a powerful criminal organization called the Vice Lords, led by Papillo. In the same year, Ramon Santos created a gang for young Cubans and Puerto Ricans in New York, called the Imperials. Their goal was to defend against the large Greek and Italian gangs that harbored racial prejudice and hatred towards Hispanics. Over time, the Imperials grew, gaining important members like Ripepo, who later took control of the gang. By 1978, the Imperials changed their emblem to a 5-pointed star, each point symbolizing respect, honesty, unity, knowledge, and love. They kept a low profile to avoid media and police attention, involving themselves in community services instead. During this decade, many Hispanic families migrated, and Ramon and some Imperials moved north, establishing territories. In 1958, many imprisoned gang members were released, and the Vice Lords quickly took control of the North Lawndale area. They expanded to the west side and even across the city. Meanwhile, areas like Inglewood were seeing migrations of African Americans, leading to tensions with the predominantly Italian locals. In 1968, a group of young African Americans inspired by the Bible formed the Disciples of the Devil, which later became the Gangster Disciples, adopting the Star of David as their symbol. By 1958, the Vice Lords were the most powerful and organized gang in the city, a superpower compared to the weaker neighboring gangs. They operated differently, with decentralized power across territories, allowing them to grow rapidly. In the neighborhood of Mudtown, a young man named Jeff Fort, inspired by his powerful relatives, founded his own gang in 1959, the Blackstone Rangers, following the Vice Lords model. The Gangster Disciples began to expand from Inglewood, expelling Italians and annexing other African American gangs. However, they struggled to expand in other areas, focusing instead on solidifying their power in Inglewood. In 1963, the Disciples faced opposition from the Rangers and a neighboring gang, leading to an alliance with the Vice Lords and Imperials to fight the Disciples. The Disciples' headquarters was in Inglewood, and the Rangers aimed to dominate the area. Knowing it would be difficult to invade the central neighborhood, they targeted the northern border, clashing with the Disciples. Realizing the Rangers were getting stronger, the Disciples launched their own invasions. In 1964, White Sal and Ripepo noticed many similarities between the Disciples and created the Latin Kings. The Latin Kings initially clashed with the Vice Lords over territory, expanding into Humboldt Park while losing ground in the near west side. In July 1966, the gangs decided to cease hostilities due to the increasing violence from racist police officers against young Puerto Ricans. They united for human rights, gaining nationwide recognition. Jeff and Harrison aimed to expand their gang's influence, so in 1965 they held a meeting with other gang leaders, forming the Black P. Stone Nation, doubling their strength. The Vice Lords, growing rapidly, created several sets within the gang for easier control. By the 1960s, they had nearly 10,000 members. Each set had its own leader and specific territory, but all operated under the Vice Lords banner. The Vice Lords also started legitimate businesses like restaurants to reduce criminal stigma, with help from external businessmen and bankers. Meanwhile, a group of young African Americans in North Englewood admired the pimps and wanted to emulate them, forming the Gangster Disciples. Initially leaderless, Leo and Rover eventually took control, making the gang powerful. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, the gangs fought for territory in various neighborhoods. The Disciples and the Gangster Disciples formed a coalition against the Black P. Stones, successfully expanding their reach. By the late 1960s, Ford and Harrison saw an opportunity to profit from heroin with the mafia, getting rich selling drugs. However, this angered the Disciples, who plotted to kill Ford. Aware of the threat, the Black P. Stones started extorting businesses to fund weapons purchases for their own protection. In 1967, Ike Taylor, a disciple, moved to West Garfield Park and established a strong relationship with the local youth, setting up a new territory for the Gangster Disciples. He appointed Robert Larson as the chief of arms, making the gang heavily armed and dominant in some areas. The Vice Lords didn't like this development. Up to this point, the gangs were in a growth phase with many rivalries, but everything was about to change when Jeff Fort made a bold move. Well, that's the end of part 1 of this video.